The story of a husband who threw me into prison for 3 years so he could enjoy life with his young mistress. On the day of my release, he drove a luxury car worth nearly 100 grand to pick me up. However, the prison warder suddenly announced a piece of news that made him collapse to his knees, right on the spot. Please listen to the end of this video to discover the dramatic conclusion of this story. And if you enjoy it, please give it a like and share by's Praskol. Your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the Untold Blank Stories channel so you won't miss out on great new stories every day. The heavy iron chains ground against each other with a harsh screech. The massive gates of HMP Blackwood slowly rolled open to one side. Standing just inside the threshold, I cast my eyes over the damp, gravelly path ahead. I was still wearing the same faded clothes from 3 years ago, my shortly cropped hair tied hastily into a messy bun at the nape of my neck, my chapped hands buried deep in the pockets of my jacket. 3 long, excruciating years, and finally I was stepping across this green line. But deep down, I knew perfectly well that some things do not simply end just because you step outside a prison gate. For instance, the monumental injustice, the betrayal by the man I once called my husband, and the very day he personally pushed me into the criminal justice system just to protect his place. Mistress. Right outside the prison gates, a gleaming black Range Rover was parked ostentatiously in the middle of the road. It was an expensive motor. He usually drove it to meet wealthy clients to inspect timber, but parking it in this desolate, bleak place made it look utterly grotesque. Standing by the car door was Thomas. He wore a crisp designer shirt, flawlessly ironed, carrying his familiar tall stature and furrowed brows bearing the quintessential arrogance of a wealthy Yorkshire timber mill director who had struck it rich. He looked slightly thinner than he had 3 years ago, his eyes fixed on the iron gates as if terrified I might disappear. Over the past 3 years, I was devanin to say, told he drove up here every single day, come rain or shine. Every time I refused to see him, returning only the words, "No visitors through the prison." Warder. Yet he stubbornly persisted. In the mind of a rich man like him, he probably thought that as long as he was patient enough and looked remorseful enough, the day I walked out of here, I would burst into tears and give him the chance to speak. Thomas let out a heavy breath, his Adam's apple bobbing, and took clumsy, hesitant steps towards me. He spoke, his voice hoarse, trying to suppress a fabricated tremble. "I'm here to take you home, Eleanor." I didn't even bother to spare him a second glance, my eyes sweeping past his lies. 100 grand car as if looking at a pile of scrap metal by the pavement. Turning on my heel, carrying a plastic bag holding a few old clothes, I walked straight towards the large oak tree on the other side of the road. A white Mini Cooper belonging to Diana had already been parked there for a while. Seeing me emerge, Diana, my absolute best mate since our days of having nothing, rushed forward with red, teary eyes and threw her arms around me. My spine stiffened slightly. It took a moment before I slowly raised my calloused hand to gently pat her back. "I'm out," I whispered. Just 2 short words, but behind them were countless sleepless nights, biting my lip to endure pain that made me wish for death. Only, I knew how I had managed to survive. Before we could exchange another word, the sound of Thomas's hurried footsteps echoed behind us. He strode over, blocking my path, his eyes bloodshot, filled with stubbornness and belated regret. "Eleanor, I'm taking you home. Let's go." "Home and talk, please?" The word home rolled out of his mouth so smoothly, yet it stung so bitterly. Only then did I finally lift my head to look him straight in the eye. My gaze was flat and ice cold, no hatred, no screaming, and not a single weak tear. I looked at him exactly as I would look at a stranger on the street. That utter coldness made Thomas falter. He would have preferred me to scream, cry, curse, or scratch his face, rather than this absolute emotional deadness. He hastily lowered his voice, looking pleading. "Eleanor, I was wrong. The accounting discrepancy that year at the mill. It was because I didn't check it properly, because I was blinded by Charlotte. I know whatever I say now is useless, but for 3 years, I've been here every single day waiting for you. Come back with me, I will make it up to you. I've kicked Charlotte out. I will give everything back to you." Thomas took another step forward, reaching out to grab my arm. Out of pure reflex, I leaned away to dodge it. His hand froze awkwardly in midair. Admitting you were wrong doesn't mean I have to forgive you. I opened my mouth, my voice so deep and cold there wasn't a trace of warmth in it. Diana immediately stepped up, shielding me, and glared fiercely at him. Drop the act, Thomas. My friend has barely stepped out of hell, and here you are, blocking her way. Haven't you ruined her enough? Get out of the way and let us leave. I just want to take her home. Eleanor, our home. Thomas still strained his neck, desperately trying to salvage a shred of dignity as the man of the house. Hearing this, I suddenly let out a laugh, a hollow, sarcastic laugh. Home? I narrowed my eyes at him, enunciating every single word. The day you threw me into prison to take the fall for your mistress, I ceased to have a home. The words struck him like a dagger to the heart. Thomas's face turned ashen. He had genuinely believed that his money and his timber business could cover up anything. He thought that if he just bowed his head and apologized, everything would return to normal. Unfortunately, spilt milk can never be gathered back. Move, I brushed past his shoulder, turning to get into Diana's car. In a panic, Thomas clumsily reached out and grabbed my wrist tightly. The grip was so forceful it made me frown. Let go, Diana yelled, raising her hand ready to strike him. I looked down at my emaciated wrist, firmly trapped in his grasp, and hissed, through gritted teeth, let go of me. Don't use that condescending attitude to dirty me any further. Does your fake remorse out here help me endure a single freezing night in there? Stop using this fabricated repentance. It makes me sick. Thomas was stunned, his lips trembling, but unable to force out half a word. Right at the peak of the tension, the small side gate of the prison opened. Officer Andrews, the warder in charge of the female inmates' wing for the past years, stepped out. He was in his uniform, his face weathered by the Yorkshire wind and sun, the man who had silently witnessed the times I nearly died in my cell. Seeing Officer Andrews, Thomas clung to him like a drowning man to a raft, desperately pleading, Officer Andrews, please help me talk some sense into her. Eleanor won't listen to me. Please bear witness for me for 3 years. I've been here every single day for visits. I truly want to make amends. Officer Andrews walked over, his eyes sweeping over Thomas's disheveled appearance, then over to me. He let out a heavy sigh, speaking in a steady, plain yet ironclad voice. Mr. Thomas, you say you've been here every day. Yes, 3 whole years, every single day without fail. Thomas nodded, frantically. Officer Andrews nodded slowly, his gaze suddenly turning razor-sharp. You persistently knocked on this gate for 3 long years. So do you know that in her 2nd year in prison, Eleanor gave birth to a baby girl? What did you just say, mate? Thomas's voice floated in the air, his knees trembling, stumbling back a step. Officer Andrews's face remained impassive, his voice firm as he repeated every blank 3 word clearly. I said, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter in the prison infirmary. The little girl is 2 years old now. Bang! An explosion went off in Thomas's head. He whipped his head around to stare at me, his face completely drained of blood. You gave birth in prison? Is he telling the truth? You had a baby? Thomas stammered, his breathing erratic, clutching his chest as if he were suffocating. I stood with my arms crossed, my expression unrippled, letting the silence tear his soul apart. The silence at this moment was far more brutal than 10,000 Thouser Place curses. Thomas felt the world spinning. He had been so smug about his deep devotion, believing he was redeeming himself by parking at the prison gates every day. He fancied himself a magnanimous husband waiting for his errant wife. Yet, from beginning to end, he had no idea that the wife he sent to prison was carrying his own flesh and blood. That child was born in the darkest, most deprived, and freezing place imaginable. Is she my child? Thomas choked out, tears welling in his eyes, his voice breaking into pieces. Hearing that question, Diana couldn't hold back a bitter, hysterical laugh. Now, you ask that question, you bastard? When Eleanor was throwing up her guts with severe morning sickness, unable to swallow the slop they served in there, where were you? When she gave birth prematurely, hemorrhaged, and nearly died on the prematurely as hemorrhaged, infirmary delivery table 2 lives hanging by a thread. Where were you? You boast about coming here every day, but when the mother of your child needed you, most, you were burying your head in dirty money and that tart of yours. Diana's insults slammed into Thomas's head like boulders. He staggered back. Another 2 steps, his legs turning to jelly, his knees giving way as he collapsed into the mud beside his Range Rover's tires. His hands gripped the bonnet so tightly his veins bulged, his entire body shaking violently. It turned out that over the past 3 years, he hadn't just lost a wife, he had missed the birth of his own biological daughter. A child who should have been pampered in luxury was forced to be born in a cramped prison cell, enduring humiliation alongside her mother. All of this was created by his very own hands. Eleanor, why? Why didn't you tell me? Thomas looked up, his face streaked. With tears, his bloodshot eyes utterly shattered. I slowly turned my head, looking straight down at the man groveling in the plaxer, dirt, and dropped words of pure ice. Tell you for what? So the man who ruthlessly destroyed my life could have another chance to play the role of a decent father? Thomas, you don't deserve it. With that, I didn't hesitate for another second. I decisively opened the door and got into Diana's Mini. Diana shot Thomas a scathing glare that could burn his face off, then hurriedly hopped into the driver's seat and hit the accelerator. A long time later, Diana sniffled and asked softly, "Does your wrist hurt? That bastard squeezed it so hard earlier." Let me see. I looked down at my scrawny wrist. Indeed, a stark red ring was embedded in my dough. Pale skin. But I didn't feel any pain. Or perhaps physical pain meant absolutely nothing compared to what I had already tasted. I pulled my jacket sleeve down to hide it, replying faintly, "I'm fine." "You call this fine?" Diana ground her teeth, smacking the steering wheel. "Thomas is completely shameless. 3 years ago, he colluded with his bit on the side, forged the mill's paperwork, and sent you to prison. 3 years. Later, he shows up with that rat face playing the devoted husband. The sickest part is him daring to ask why you didn't tell him about little Daisy. Who does? He think he is? Does he think he even has the right to be a father?" I leaned my head against the glass, watching the rows of silver birch trees. Speed past, my voice monotone. Of course he has no right. If Officer Andrews hadn't exposed the truth today, he would probably still be drowning in his script of being the forgiving husband. He thinks bringing a posh car and bowing his head means me and my daughter would obediently pack our bags and serve him. Like before, Diana scoffed coldly. Typical nouveau rich mentality, thinking he can buy the weather. Imagine, with his fake pride, how mental he must have gone when he found out the truth. He definitely will. I closed my eyes. Being exposed for his cruelty in front of others was, to Thomas, like being stripped naked in the middle of the market. But our job now isn't to watch how much he suffers. It's to figure out how to take back everything I've lost. The car drove through the streets, bustling with morning traffic and delivery vans. Over an hour later, Diana turned into a small block of flats situated on the outskirts of the city center in Leeds. The flat was on the 6th floor. While not overly spacious, it caught the sunlight and breeze perfectly. As soon as I opened the door, a familiar warmth hit my nose. The wooden floors were spotless, the curtains a pale yellow, and on the coffee table sat a vase of fresh daisies. In the corner of the lounge, there was a small plastic bookshelf and a few soft plush teddy bears. I froze at the threshold. It had been far too long since I had seen a place that truly looked like the word home. Diana tossed the keys onto the shoe cabinet, pressed my shoulders to sit me down on the sofa, and grinned. "Why the blank stare?" "I rented this place last week. Got a cleaner to scrub it top to bottom. The security here is top-notch. There's a concierge downstairs with key fob access. That scumbag Thomas won't find it. Easy to cause a scene here. You just stay here and rest up. Once you're fully recovered, I'll drive you to pick up Daisy." At the mention of my daughter, the thin layer of ice in my eyes finally melted. Slightly. My throat tightened. I had to take a deep breath to ask, how has she been with the childminder these past few days? Touch wood, she eats and sleeps like an angel. Diana bustled into the kitchen, poured a glass of warm water, and brought it out, tutting. Though she misses you. Last night, hugging her bunny, she whispered and asked me, "Has Mummy? Eleanor finished fighting the bad guys yet, Auntie? Why is she taking so long?" It broke my bloody heart. Hearing that, my heart felt like it was being squeezed tight. My trembling hand reached into my jacket pocket and carefully pulled out a tiny photograph. meticulously wrapped in plastic. In the photo was a little girl with pigtails, chubby cheeks, and a smile as clear as a ray of sunshine. That was little Daisy. The tiny life I had traded my blood and tears to keep. She was the only reason I didn't bite my tongue to end it all on the night I realized I had been framed, wrongfully convicted, and thrown behind 4 grim walls. Looking at her, my eyes gradually sharpened, turning ice cold. From today onwards, I will never let anyone bully me and my daughter again. Those who threw me into the mud, I will force them to taste the filth themselves. Just then, the doorbell rang urgently. Diana frowned, looking towards the door, cautiously. "Who's that?" "It's Arthur," a deep, decisive male voice echoed from outside. Diana breathed a sigh of relief and hurried to open the door. The man who walked in was Arthur, a sharp local solicitor known for taking on incredibly tough cases, whom Diana had engaged while I was serving my sentence. He carried a scuffed leather briefcase, dressed neatly in a tucked-in shirt. "Eleanor, congratulations on your release," Arthur nodded in greeting. I stood up and nodded back. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur. How is the matter?" I asked. "You to investigate progressing?" Arthur didn't waste time and got straight to the point. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and placed it on the coffee table. Over the past few days, I've scoured through the entire case file and the mill's accounting ledgers from that year. Thomas might be a successful timber merchant, but his paperwork management is as leaky as a sieve. Have a look. He flipped open the first page. It was a bank statement. This is the latest clue that Charlotte, the head accountant, deliberately covered up. That year, under the guise of material consulting fees, she siphoned off over £80,000. This money bounced through 3 personal accounts before finally landing in a savings fund registered in her biological mother's name. My eyes scanned the figures coldly. 80 grand. That year, Charlotte had used my internal accounting login, forged my signature, and embezzled this money from the company. Then she made a massive scene, claiming I was the corrupt one who betrayed the family business. Furthermore, Arthur pointed to another page to complete the script of framing you. Charlotte colluded with Vincent, the mill's foreman. They coached and bribed a few junior carpenters to act as false witnesses. But their stupidity was leaving behind a trail of irregular spending. I have tracked down the whereabouts of one of those witnesses. Diana, sitting next to me, slammed the table. That greedy tart. Stealing. Someone's husband wasn't enough. She embezzled tens of thousands and then sent the lawful wife to prison. We have to skin her alive this time. They thought sending me to prison was the end of the story, that they could sleep soundly. But they didn't know that inside I became acquainted with the wife of a construction contractor. Through fragmented stories about building projects, I pieced together the way Thomas's mill used to conduct dodgy business, which led me to ask Diana to hire Arthur to follow the trail. Right at that moment, my phone on the table lit up. I casually glanced at the load. Incoming text message. "Eleanor, I know I was wrong 1,000 times over, but the child is innocent. She needs a father. Please, let me see my daughter just once. I am downstairs in the lobby." Diana caught a glimpse, gritted her teeth, and swore. "Bloody hell. He's like a bad smell that won't go away. Dared to follow us all the way here. Call the Fire 66 in concierge and get him thrown out." I didn't reply. My expression didn't change at all. I picked up the phone, took a screenshot of that pathetic message, and decisively blocked his number. I walked out to the balcony and looked down. Sure enough, through the sheer curtains, I saw Thomas's black Range Rover parked right in front of the concierge desk. He was standing outside, gesturing wildly at the security guard, clearly demanding to be let up. A man who was once a majestic director now looked like a desperate sleepwalker trying to cling to the phantom of the family, happiness he had destroyed with his own hands. I turned back, the fire of vengeance burning in my eyes. "Mr. Arthur," you said. "You found the false witness. Where is he?" Arthur flipped open his notebook, tapping his pen on the page. "Harry. Used to be a junior bookkeeper at the mill, sacked due to gambling debts. After a few years off the radar, he's now hiding from loan sharks, working cash in hand as a tire fitter at a dodgy, rundown garage on a rough council estate on the outskirts of town. I fear that if we don't act fast, if Thomas or Charlotte gets wind of this, they'll send someone to silence him with cash or force him to skip town. I grabbed my jacket, draped over the chair, and slipped it on. Then we don't. Wait. We go find Harry right now. Arthur looked at me for a beat, his eyes showing clear approval. He nodded, pushed up his glasses, and hurriedly shoved the documents back into his scuffed briefcase. If it's decided, we must leave immediately. Just earlier, my contact at the mill tipped me off that Thomas's people are also frantically searching everywhere for Harry. They are definitely in a rush. Thomas acts bloody fast, doesn't he? Diana swore, grabbing the car keys off the table. This morning, he shows up at the prison gates, putting on a tear-jerking show of devotion, and by evening, he's sending his thugs to silence. Witnesses. Typical thief crying, "Stop thief." I zipped up my windbreaker, feeling the biting chill of the early winter night seep through the fabric. This sensation made my mind extraordinarily clear. This morning, when he heard I gave birth to Daisy in prison, his panic was genuine. I spoke flatly as I slipped my feet into my old trainers, but for a genuine man who values his pride and status as much as him, that remorse isn't worth a penny. When weighed against his director's chair and the mill's reputation, he is terrified Harry will open his mouth. He is terrified the whole town will know. The respectable director is actually a scumbag who colluded with his mistress to frame his own wife. Arthur added information as we walked towards the door, the dim hallway light, casting shadows on his calm profile. Harry is in a desperate state right now. Since being sacked, he's drowning in gambling debts with massive interest. The local thugs are hunting him ruthlessly. If Thomas's people find him first, they just need to slap a wad of cash in his face to clear his debts, and he'll shut up or even disappear from Yorkshire forever. If that happens, our chain of evidence breaks. Then we can't let them beat us to it. Diana gritted her teeth, unlocking the blank Mini Cooper parked downstairs. Get in, I'm flooring it all the way there. Sitting in the back seat, I gazed out the window as the glass slowly fogged up. With condensation, the blurry street scenes whipped past. It had been 3 years since I had freely looked at the streets at this hour. Back in the day, on winter nights like this, Thomas and I used to ride on a battered old motorbike to deliver timber. My hands bled from splinters, whilst he endlessly swore, "Bear with this hardship a little longer, Eleanor. Once the mill takes off, I'll buy a posh car and build a mansion for you and our kids to live in luxury." The mansion was bought, the car was acquired, and the mill expanded to become one of the biggest in the county. But the person sitting in the passenger seat next to him wasn't me anymore. It was Charlotte, the young and pretty head accountant. The vows of the past vanished into the wind, leaving only a 7-year prison sentence crashing down on my head like a cruel joke. And now, that very husband was frantically sending people racing into the night just to cover up the filthy crime he committed against the mother of his child. Take a right at the upcoming junction. Arthur's steady voice cut through my wandering thoughts. He was glued to his phone screen, navigating Diana towards the industrial outskirts. Another mile and we're at the estate. The car pulled into a dark, secluded corner away from the streetlights, a few dozen yards from our target. Ahead of us was a dilapidated motorcycle and car repair garage. The corrugated iron sign was rusted, missing half its letters. The front shutter was pulled halfway up, and a sickly pale fluorescent light spilled out, revealing a filthy concrete floor stained with engine oil and rubbish. Despite the late hour, the clanking of spanners and wrenches echoed from inside. A few heavily tattooed youths were squatting by the wall, smoking aggressively. Arthur narrowed his eyes, observing the scene, and lowered his voice. "Look closely. There are 2 blokes in tucked-in shirts loitering around the kebab shop opposite. Their demeanor doesn't fit this area. 80% chance they are Thomas's men from the mill." I held my breath, following his gaze. Indeed, those 2 kept throwing anxious glances towards the garage. If they barged in there, given Harry's cowardly, rat-like nature, he would definitely panic and run. Harry is someone who specializes in stabbing people in the back. By nature, he's greedy but cowardly, I analyzed, my eyes locked on the flimsy shutter. Right now, he's hiding from debts like a frightened bird. If he sees men in smart clothes looking for him, he won't think they're old colleagues bringing cash. He'll assume they're debt collectors hired by loan sharks to break his legs. With the front so noisy, he definitely won't show his face. Arthur nodded in agreement. Exactly. The layout of these units usually includes a back door leading into an alleyway for rubbish or as a fire escape. We can't go through the front and bump into Thomas's men, it would spook him. We need to split up. Diana suddenly slapped her hand on the steering wheel, her eyes lighting up. Leave the front to me. I'm brilliant at creating a scene. In a minute, I'll pretend to walk past and start a massive row with those drunks outside. Or scream that I've been pickpocketed. The louder the better. Thomas's thugs will get distracted. And Harry, inside, hearing the massive commotion, will lose his nerve and definitely try to slip out the back. Be careful. I gently grasped Diana's wrist, warning her. Don't get hurt. If it gets too heated, pull back immediately. Understand? I know. My nan argued in the local market for years. These numpties are nothing. Diana winked, pulled her baseball cap low to hide her face, and adjusted her collar. You two loop around the back and wait. As soon as you hear me start swearing, get ready to grab that bastard. Diana pushed the door open and blended into the darkness. Arthur and I immediately left the car, quietly circling past a fly-tipping site reeking of rotting rubbish to enter the narrow alleyway behind the garage. The alley was damp and so pitch black that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Underfoot were puddles of stagnant water mixed with rubbish and broken glass. We pressed ourselves into a dark corner behind a mountain of old tires, right next to a flimsy metal door that served as the garage's rear exit. My heart beat a steady, heavy rhythm. Standing in this suffocating darkness, I was reminded of the endless nights curled up on the freezing concrete bunk of my cell. Misery, filth, despair. I had tasted enough of those. Now it was their turn. A few minutes passed, and suddenly a screeching voice echoed from the front. Which little prick bumped into my bag? Are you bloody blind, walking like an Enna? Absolute freak? Diana's voice rang out shrill and loud, deliberately provoking and escalating the situation. Immediately after, there was the clattering of plastic chairs being knocked over, angry shouting from the drunks, and the jeering of bystanders. The fake brawl was a success, drawing the attention of the entire street front. I held my breath, ears straining. Sure enough, from behind the thin metal wall, I heard panicked, heavy footsteps tripping over tools with a clatter. The sound of a bolt being frantically unlocked echoed. Creak! The metal door was shoved open, and a stream of sickly yellow light spilled from inside into the dark alley. Along with the light, a short, scrawny man wearing a grimy vest, dripping with sweat, burst out like a rat smoked out of its hole. He tripped over a broken brick, stumbling and nearly face-planting into a puddle of oily sludge. His flip-flops scraped against the tarmac, making a harsh screech. Harry hastily grabbed the mossy wall to steady himself, glancing back nervously towards the garage where Diana's swearing was still blaring, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Just as he was about to turn and leg it down the only exit of the alley, a tall figure blocked his path. Arthur stood with his arms crossed, completely composed, his long shadow cast by the yellow light from the door. Harry jumped, clumsily stepping back, and before he could even utter a curse, his eyes met mine. I stepped out from the shadows, slowly approaching him. In the thick stench of rubbish and mold, he stared at me. His eyes rolled back and widened so much it looked like they would pop out of his skull. His sallow skin, pale from lack of sleep and debt stress, instantly drained of all blood. His jaw dropped, stammering as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Eleanor. Harry retreated another step, his heel hitting the pile of scrap tires behind him. Eleanor, what are you doing here? I stood barely 2 steps away from him, my ice-cold eyes pinning down his face, which was contorting in terror. The man who had stood in court 3 years ago, articulating clearly as he pointed at me, swearing that I had ordered him to falsify the books, was now shivering like a beaten dog. 3 years, and you still remember me? My voice was low and steady, carrying no screaming rage, yet it felt as heavy as a boulder crushing his chest. Harry gulped, beads of cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. His scumbag instincts told him that the situation was entirely out of his control. He darted his eyes around, looking for an escape, but Arthur had smoothly shifted to block the only way out. I don't know what you're talking about. Harry tried to put on a brave front, his voice cracking with fear. The court settled this ages ago. If you're out of prison, that's your business. Why are you looking for me? I don't know. Anything. I suddenly smirked, a smile so faint it made Harry shudder. I know how the court ruled better than you do. I didn't come here tonight to reminisce, nor to listen to your pathetic lies. I paused, taking a half step forward, pinning him against the cold wall. I came to inform you that Thomas has his men hunting for 8. You right out there. At the mention of Thomas, Harry's pupils contracted. He gasped for air, his filthy hands clutching the fabric of his vest. What's the matter? Can't keep up the act? A shrill, mocking voice echoed from the end of the alley. Diana appeared, fanning herself with her baseball cap, looking triumphant after causing a riot. You're a popular bloke, Harry. Out. Front. There are 2 meatheads in tucked-in shirts asking around for you. As soon as I caused a scene, they stepped outside to call Boss Thomas. How long do you think you can hide here? Harry was genuinely panicking now. He knew exactly why Thomas was looking for in him. He wasn't the mastermind back then, but he was a crucial cog who took the bribe to frame me. For years he had lived like a rat, hiding from gambling, debts, thinking the past was buried. Who knew that now? Everyone was knocking at his door. I really don't know anything. Please let me go. He dropped to one knee, his voice shaking like he was about to cry. You know, I cut him off coldly, every word sharp as a Stanley knife. You know exactly how much Charlotte paid you to alter that materials report. You know, that dummy sign-off procedure was never legitimately authorized. And you know exactly how much of a cut you took when Thomas used his money to silence the Plosts. Witnesses. With every sentence I dropped, Harry's face grew whiter. He clutched his head, stammering, How do you know? That's not all. Arthur finally spoke up leisurely. He pulled a tiny dictaphone from his breast pocket, the red light blinking on recording mode. Harry, everything you just said has been recorded. Now you have 2 choices. Arthur raised 2 fingers, his professional, cold tone psychologically cornering the process. Man standing on the cliff's edge. 1, you keep your mouth shut, wait for Thomas's thugs to grab you in a minute. They'll stuff some hush money in your pocket and then pin the entire crime on. If you to whitewash their boss. When the police come knocking, you'll be the only one doing time for all of them. Harry visibly shuddered, his facial muscles twitching. 2, Arthur continued. You come with us, cooperate, and tell the whole truth. As a witness to the authorities to get leniency. At the very least, you won't become the scapegoat dying for someone else. His eyes darted frantically, clearly weighing the pros and cons. His nature was pragmatic. He'd go whichever way the wind blew. He gritted his teeth and looked up at Arthur. Why should I trust you? Thomas is a well-connected director. What makes you think you can protect me from him? I stared deeply into those cowardly eyes, stepping closer until I was in his face. My voice was nothing but a spine-chilling whisper. Harry, I think you're confused. I didn't come here to beg for your help. I'm offering you a lifeline. Do you think Thomas is looking for you to protect you? If he truly wanted to? Shelter you, you wouldn't be hiding in this piss-stinking corner-dodging loan. Sharks for the last 3 years. He's desperately searching for you for one reason only. He is terrified. He's terrified I'll overturn the verdict. Terrified the rotten books will be exposed. A lowlife like you, in his eyes, is just a disposable rag. Go with him tonight, and tomorrow when the storm hits, you'll be the first one thrown under the bus to take the blame. My words pierced into Harry's deepest fears. Having worked at the timber mill, he knew perfectly well the cold-blooded, cutthroat nature of Thomas and his mistress, Charlotte. When it came to protecting his core interests, Thomas would sacrifice anyone. Just as Harry was sweating bullets, agonizing over his decision, the sound of heavy, rapid footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. A gruff man's voice rang out. Check the back alley, see if anyone looks dodgy. Bloody hell, with all that racket, he might have slipped away. Diana jumped, nudging my arm. Eleanor, Thomas's men are here. Arthur remained impassive, but his gaze turned to steel. He looked at Harry, delivering an ultimatum. 10 seconds. Come with us, or stay here and wait for them to lead you to the slaughter. Harry snapped his head up, met my calm, merciless eyes, and his heart clenched. He realized that the woman he had sent to prison had absolutely nothing left to lose. Pushed to the brink, He snatched the business card from Arthur's hand, his voice trembling but urgent. I'll come with you. Hurry. Coward. If you knew what was good for you earlier, it would have saved us time. Diana cursed under her breath, immediately turning on her heel. This way. The car is parked just outside. The four of us moved swiftly through the piles of rubbish towards the main road. The moment we stepped out of the dark alley and the yellow streetlights hit our Prasley and under faces, the air felt slightly less suffocating. Just as Diana's car keys beeped as to unlock the doors, a familiar voice, laced with rage and utter panic, rang out from behind. Stop right there. Diana froze, turning her head to swear. Stop your bloody but the smile on her face vanished instantly. I slowly turned around. Standing about 10 meters away, under the flickering streetlight, was Thomas. He had personally come to this filthy slum. Gone was the polished, respectable appearance from this morning at the prison gates. Right now, Thomas looked pathetically disheveled. His designer shirt was wrinkled, buttons undone, his forehead slick with sweat. He was panting heavily, his bloodshot eyes staring daggers at our group. His gaze swept over me, over Arthur, and finally locked onto Harry, who was cowering behind us. Eleanor. Thomas's voice was hoarse, a mix of disbelief and uncontrollable panic. What are you doing here? He waved his hand, and the two heavily tattooed thugs in shirts immediately stepped forward from behind him, looking ready to snatch Harry. Arthur immediately stepped in front, pushing up his glasses, his professional, yet razor-sharp voice echoing. Mr. Thomas, I suggest you keep your men in check. We are in a public space. If your men threaten us or attempt to abduct anyone, I will call the police immediately for false imprisonment. Thomas halted, his face draining from red to a sickly white. He gritted his teeth, ignoring Arthur, and focused entirely on me. A blaze of stubbornness and control burned in his eyes. Eleanor, come over here. He lowered his voice, trying to force a fake gentleness that only sounded suffocating. The issues at the mill, the past. I will sort it out. Don't listen to outsiders and bring trouble upon yourself. Come back with me, I guarantee. Guarantee what? I cut him off. My voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet night, it was as sharp as a slap to his face. I slowly took a step forward, directly facing the man I once shared a bed with. Under the streetlight, I saw right through his rotting soul. He said he was remorseful, said he wanted to make amends, said he cried for his daughter. It was all a cheap play. You say you want to make it up to me, you beg to see our child. I smirked, slightly, my eyes cold to the extreme. Yet, your first reaction when you realize I'm seeking the truth is to rush here in the dead of night to block my one path, to snatch a witness, to protect your filthy facade. Thomas was speechless, his lips trembling, but no sound came out. Stripped bare, in the middle of the street, he looked like a cornered beast. You never once regretted hurting me. I gritted out every word, hurling them at his cowardly ego. You only regret that things are slipping out of your control. You're terrified your reputation as the mill director will be tainted. Thomas, you've never loved anyone but yourself. Hearing those words, it was as if all the strength was drained from Thomas's spine. He stumbled, reaching out to grab me. No, Eleanor, listen to me. Explain. Stay away from me. I slapped his hand away, my eyes filled with absolute disgust. You are just as filthy as you always were. With that, I turned and decisively climbed into the back of the car. Diana shoved Harry in after me, then quickly jumped into the driver's seat. Arthur got into the passenger seat and slammed the door. The loud thud of the car door, slamming shut, extinguished Thomas's last illusions. The car revved, its tires crunching over the gravel, splashing a trail of dirty water towards the man left, frozen in the dark. Nearly half an hour later, the car turned into a winding suburban alley, stopped in front of a row of cheap single-story breeze-block bedsits, usually rented monthly by laborers. Get in, Arthur tapped Harry's shoulder, nodding towards the end room. This was a place Arthur had got a mate to rent earlier that afternoon. The security was rubbish, but it was incredibly discreet. Nobody cared about anyone else's business here. The flimsy wooden door creaked open into a room barely 15 square meters. Arthur pulled the only plastic chair to the middle of the room, gestured for Harry to sit, and then held out his hand. Phone. Hand it over. Harry hesitated, his defensive instincts flaring up. He shoved his hands in his pockets, stammering. Phone? What for? What if my loan sharks call? Diana lost her patience, glaring and shouting. You're worrying about loan. Sharks when your life is on the line? If we don't take your phone, what if you text Thomas our location? Right now you have two options. 1, you spill the truth and we protect you. 2, I throw you out there for the Mills thugs too. Chop into pieces. Pick one. Intimidated by Diana, Harry shriveled up like a slug covered in salt. Trembling, he pulled out his smashed screen phone and obediently placed it on the grubby plastic table. Arthur put it in his briefcase, then pulled out the dictaphone and hit the red button. The fluorescent tube on the ceiling flickered a few times before glowing brightly, illuminating the sallow, gaunt face of the Tuplins, man who had stood in court and sent me to my death. I stood with my arms crossed, leaning against the cold wall, my eyes locked onto him. The silence stretched for tens of seconds, enough to let the psychological pressure crush the final bits of resistance in Harry's mind. Speak, I commanded in an even tone. 3 years ago, that mess of fraudulent books at the mill, from the dispatch notes to the fake VAT invoices, who did it? Who ordered you? Harry swallowed hard, glancing at the recorder, then at me. He bit his lip, finally opening his mouth, his voice a breathless whisper. It was Charlotte. About 6 months before you were arrested, Charlotte promised me 30 grand. She told me to forge a few payment vouchers and dispatch notes for the imported Brazilian mahogany. Mahogany? Diana frowned, interrupting. Your mill didn't have a license to import that in bulk. You were buying it illicitly on the black market. Yes, exactly. Harry nodded quickly, cold sweat forming. Because it was illicit, there were no input invoices. Charlotte used that loophole, told me to double the purchase value on paper and withdraw the cash under the guise of facilitation fees. A bit every month, I followed her orders. But the catch was, to avoid suspicion from the tax auditors, the payment vouchers needed the head accountant's signature, which meant you, Eleanor. I never signed those vouchers. How did you bypass the bank and the auditors? Harry shrank back, looking at me nervously. Charlotte told me to practice forging it. Your signature is quite simple. I just traced it until it looked about 80% right, then slipped them into the middle of a massive stack of documents at month end for you to skim over. Once the money safely cleared into Charlotte's family accounts, she gave me a cut as hush money. Everything was becoming clear. £80,000. That figure hadn't vanished overnight. It was a systematic, organized embezzlement. But Charlotte, despite being Thomas's mistress and having power at the mill, was just a greedy woman. She couldn't have covered the sky with one hand without someone backing her up. I stood up straight, stepping closer to Harry. My shadow fell heavily over him. What about Vincent, the foreman who always boasted about being Thomas's right-hand man? What role did he play? Harry shuddered. Vincent. Vincent was the one who approved the dispatch orders. He knew exactly how much timber came in and went out, like the back of his hand. When Charlotte falsified the books, Vincent noticed immediately. Noticed? And then what? Did he take the bribe and shut up too? Diana demanded. Not just take the money. Harry shook his head, his voice trembling as he revealed a truth that chilled me to the bone. Vincent took the ledger straight to the director's office to see Boss Thomas. I was bringing tea up that day and stood outside eavesdropping. Vincent showed him the book, said flat out that Charlotte was skimming the till. He asked Thomas how he wanted to handle it, because there was a joint task force inspection coming next week. If the illicit timber and the missing funds came to light, the whole mill would be frozen, and the director would go to prison. I tried to keep my voice from shaking, asking the final question. And how did he reply? Harry looked up at me, his eyes carrying the fear and slight pity of a subordinate. He answered. Boss Thomas took a drag of his cigarette, swore, and said, That greedy little tart, I told her to eat small, but we can't expose her. Now, if we expose her, my whole illicit supply chain gets busted. Vincent asked, Then who is going to take the fall for this 80 grand deficit to make the reports look clean? Harry swallowed hard and continued. Boss Thomas was silent for a long time. Then he tapped the desk and said, Push all the faulty paperwork onto Eleanor. Her name is on the company register as head accountant. The fault is her poor management and unauthorized withdrawals. I'll grease some palms to get her a light sentence, A couple of years. Then get her out early on good behavior. Just sort it quickly, don't let it drag out, this mill cannot collapse. Boom! My ears rang. A freezing chill crept from my heels straight to the top of my head, freezing my internal organs. So that was it. It wasn't that Thomas was blinded by that vixen, nor was he stupid enough to believe those fabricated evidences. He knew everything. He knew it inside out. But forced to choose between protecting his illicit business and his own freedom, he hadn't hesitated to throw me into the fire. He turned me into a pawn, a meat shield for his and his mistress's crimes. A 7-year sentence, even though I only served 3. He used my youth, my reputation, and the very lives of me and my daughter to buy peace for his director's chair. Yet this morning, he dared to show his face at the prison gates, playing the prison gates. Heartbroken husband, shedding tears and begging for forgiveness. What kind of twisted, sick love was that? You bastard! Absolute animal, Diana screamed, kicking the plastic bin into the corner. Her face was flushed, tears welling up from the sheer injustice of it. All on my behalf. Eleanor, I swear to God I'm going to stab him. You lived with him for years, built that mill from scratch with him, and he treats you like a sacrificial lamb. I didn't cry. Strangely, my eyes were bone dry. The pain had surpassed the threshold of tears. It morphed into a sharp block of ice lodged firmly in my chest. I took a deep breath, slowly closed my eyes, then opened them. My gaze was now as still as a bottomless lake. Mr. Arthur, did you record all of that clearly? I turned to the solicitor. Arthur nodded, his face also tinged with outrage, but he maintained the composure of a legal professional. He switched off the recorder, slipped it into his pocket, and articulated clearly, "This testimony is enough to expand the investigation, charging Thomas and Vincent as accomplices to perverting the rears, course of justice, and concealing criminal property. But Eleanor, Harry's word, alone isn't an ironclad guarantee. We need physical evidence, the forged payment vouchers, dispatch notes, and crucially, the digital log saved on the blank system." I nodded, understanding perfectly. Paper evidence in the hands of villains could be torn or burnt at any moment. Just then, Arthur's phone rang. He answered, listened for a few seconds, and his expression instantly hardened. He hung up, looked at me, and spoke urgently. "A tip-off from the old security guard at the mill. Thomas just sped into the yard, looking murderous. He's screaming for Vincent to get to the mill on his motorbike immediately." "What are they meeting up for at this hour?" Diana asked, bewildered. "To clean house," I replied, my voice icy. He didn't catch Harry. He knows if Harry falls into our hands, the secret is out. A man like Thomas won't wait to die. The first thing he's doing right now is destroying all the old ledgers from 3 years ago, burning all those vouchers, and then blaming it on an RT6. Electrical fire. Without the original evidence, the court will find it very hard to convict him. Arthur tapped his fingers on the table in agreement. Exactly. They are racing against time to destroy the evidence. If the archive goes up in smoke tonight, all our efforts are down the drain. Then let's go to the mill and catch them red-handed. Diana rolled up her sleeves. I shook my head, my mind calculating at high speed. No, the mill is Thomas's turf. The security guards and the workers sleeping on site are his people. If the 3 of us go there empty-handed, we might not stop them, and they could easily have us done for trespassing. So we just sit here and let them whitewash it all? Diana stamped her foot impatiently. I half closed my eyes, recalling a crucial detail that Officer Andrews had cryptically mentioned to me before my release. When my case file was transferred from the court to the prison, Officer Andrews received it. He mentioned there was a supplementary file where the timestamps looked highly suspicious. "The papers at the mill can be burnt." I looked up, my sharp voice cutting through the tension. But the digital logs on the police and prison database systems? He can't reach in and delete those. I turned to Arthur. "Arthur, get someone to watch Harry closely. Diana, drive me to the prison staff housing estate. We must see Officer Andrews tonight. We will secure that system evidence first. Then we can confidently march into Thomas's mill and knock on his door." 40 minutes later, the car pulled up in a quiet courtyard. The only light was the yellow glow from the duty office. Officer Andrews was in plain clothes, standing with his hands behind his back, waiting. He maintained his usual quiet, thoughtful demeanor. He nodded and motioned for us to follow him into a small room next to the archives. As soon as the door closed, Officer Andrews pulled open a desk drawer, took out a worn brown manila envelope, and slid it towards me. "Have a look," he said. Deeply. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photocopies. It was a copy of the Supplementary Evidence Report, the very document that cemented my Plekken embezzlement conviction 3 years ago. My eyes scanned the text and stopped at the bottom right corner. The physical ink stamp date was a full 3 days later than the official handover date. Yet, in the electronic database system, the timestamp was recorded as uploaded on the same day. Arthur leaned in to look. His breathing hitched. As a legal professional, he knew exactly what this discrepancy meant. For criminal evidence submission, timestamps are a matter of life and death. A 3-day gap proved this was fabricated documentation, slipped into the file retroactively. That year, as soon as I took the handover, something felt off. Officer Andrews lit a cigarette, taking a long drag. The prison's network system crashed for a clasid a few hours that day. When I reviewed the logs later, I found that the file upload time and the ink stamp on this paper were completely misaligned. But by then the file already had all the official red stamps, and people from the mill were constantly coming and going, pushing for the transfer. I was just a receiving officer. Even if I spoke up, no one would believe me. Diana slammed the desk indignantly. "Then why are you giving it to us now?" Officer Andrews looked straight into my eyes, his voice not loud but heavy. "Because for 3 years, Eleanor hasn't wasted her life. I've done this job long enough to see many claim innocence and seen countless others cry until they give up and accept their fate. But you were different. You didn't weep or beg. You used every day, every hour, to figure out how to survive. I haven't given up. I have no reason to keep turning a blind eye." My nose stung. In this callous society, where the husband I shared a bed with was willing to stomp me into the mud, a complete stranger chose to stand by the glazed truth. "There's one more thing." Officer Andrews pushed forward another printed barcode sheet. "The original isn't with me, but the system traces show the remote accounts granted access to retroactively insert this fake file. The login name belongs to Vincent." "The foreman!" Diana blurted out, slapping her thigh. "Thomas's loyal attack dog. Everything matches Harry's testimony perfectly." I gripped the paper tightly, my eyes draining of any remaining warmth. This network wasn't just greedy Charlotte or money-grabbing Harry. It was Vincent, facilitating it, and Thomas orchestrating it from the top. "Thank you, Officer Andrews." I stood up and bowed deeply. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for gritting your teeth and surviving until today." Officer Andrews stubbed out his cigarette. Just then, Arthur's phone buzzed. He glanced at the text, his face tightening, like a bowstring. "Thomas and Vincent are in the office on the first floor of the mill. The light in the accounts archive room is on." I neatly tucked the documents into my bag, turning decisively towards the door. To the timber mill. Late at night, the massive mill was silent. Only the sickly white fluorescent light spilled from the first-floor office window. We slipped through the side gate used by the loaders and crept up the metal staircase. As we got closer to the director's office, the sounds of rummaging and papers being thrown onto the floor grew louder. Standing outside the ajar wooden door, I heard Thomas growling, his voice laced with desperation and fury. 3 years ago, apart from you and Charlotte, did anyone else touch that batch of fake files? "No, boss, I don't know, but I've burnt all the physical ledgers," Vincent stammered. Thomas roared, slamming the desk violently. "Burning paper does fuck all if they dig up the system backups. You better pray, Vincent, because if anything else comes out, I cannot save you." "Cannot save him? Or are you just calculating how to cut him loose cleanly?" I pushed the door wide open, my icy, monotonous voice breaking the suffocating atmosphere inside. Both Thomas and Vincent jumped out of their skins, whipping around simultaneously. In the smoke-filled room, the large mahogany desk was cluttered with dozens of plastic folders containing old documents, utterly ransacked. Thomas stood, paralyzed, his shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, his forehead drenched in sweat. He looked pathetic, exactly like a rat trapped in a cage. Vincent was deathly pale, still clutching a cardboard box full of ledgers. Eleanor, what are you doing here at this hour? Thomas backed away a step, his pupils shrinking. Diana followed right behind me, smirking. Not welcoming us? We came to see what the respectable director is doing digging through rubbish in the middle of the blank dues. Knight, turns out you're trying to destroy evidence, eh? Arthur said nothing. He simply stepped back into the corner of the room, held up his phone and started recording. Seeing this, Thomas's face turned ashen. He lunged forward to snatch the phone. You dare barge into my company and film me? Have you got a death wish? My solicitor is gathering evidence at the scene of a suspect-destroying case. Files, I stated flatly, stepping squarely in front of Thomas, my knife-like glare forcing him to back down. Go ahead and call the police. Coincidentally, I was just about to invite them here to see what you and your foreman are hiding. Thomas choked. He knew perfectly well that if the police arrived right now, with a mountain of fraudulent documents strewn across his desk, he would be digging his own grave. I didn't bother looking at him anymore and turned to Vincent, who was shaking in the corner. I pulled out the system barcode printout Officer Andrews had just given me and slapped it onto the wooden desk with a thud. Looking for this? I asked, my voice thin but commanding. Vincent swallowed hard and glanced down. Just one look and his legs gave out. On the paper was clearly printed the name Vincent, along with the login ID he had used to secretly alter the submission dates of the prison files. The conviction he thought was buried in a grave 3 years ago was now dug up, crystal clear. This, Vincent stammered, casting a desperate look at Thomas. But Thomas merely clenched his jaw, his face dark and entirely silent. Thomas's silence was the most fatal answer to a petty man like Vincent. Mr. Vincent, I slowly approached him, ruthlessly peeling back the truth. You can continue to bite your tongue and take the fall for your boss, but use your brain for a second. Did he call you here tonight to save you, or to see how much dirt is on you so he can use you as the scapegoat for everything? This psychological blow hit Vincent's fatal weakness. As a subordinate surviving on scraps, he knew all too well Thomas's habit of using people and throwing them away. Vincent panicked completely, his breathing erratic. He whipped his head towards Thomas and screamed, "Boss, I followed you for years. I did whatever you asked. You can't pin the accounting mess from back then entirely on me." Shut your mouth! Thomas exploded in a rage, sweeping the pile of papers off the desk onto the floor. Don't talk absolute rubbish. Rubbish? Fear had turned into madness. Vincent lost his mind, pointing directly at Thomas's face. When Charlotte asked me to approve that fake dispatch order, I came right up here and asked you. You told me to turn a blind eye and push it through. You said if anything happened, you'd pay people off to bury it. You said to pin it all on Eleanor and it would be fine. Now that it's all blown up, you plan to cut me loose and make me go to prison alone? Not a bloody chance. Diana, standing beside me, couldn't help but burst into laughter. Brilliant. Dogs biting each other, master and servant tearing each other apart. How lovely. Make sure it's in focus, Arthur. Thomas stood rooted to the spot, his eyes streaked with blood, his chest heaving violently. He looked at Vincent, then at me. The authority of a timber director, that thousands feared now shattered into pathetic pieces on the floor. Vincent's confession just now, combined with the video in Arthur's hand, was the final nail in his coffin. I looked straight into Thomas's eyes and said calmly, Thomas, earlier you said you were remorseful, but right up to this minute, what you are doing is covering your tracks, destroying evidence, and finding a scapegoat. You don't regret hurting me and my daughter. You only regret that your cover-up wasn't perfect. Thomas couldn't utter half a word of excuse because I had hit the bullseye. Everything my solicitor has collected tonight will be handed straight to the person. Authorities tomorrow. I turned towards the door, not sparing another second for that pathetic mess. 3 years ago, you lot slept soundly on my suffering. From tonight onwards, for every day I suffered, don't you dare think you can escape a single one. As soon as we got into the car, before Diana could even start the engine, another update came through. Eleanor, bad news. Arthur's voice dropped, full of urgency. My contact at the Cluss law firm just reported that Charlotte left her flat 20 minutes ago with a suitcase, got in a taxi, and sped off. She sniffed out the danger. Hearing this, Diana slammed her hand on the steering wheel and swore, "Bloody. Hell, that tart has a nose like a bloodhound." Thomas must have wrung her to say, "It's all gone tits up. If she legs it with the cash, how are we supposed to find—" Here? I leaned my head against the seat, closed my eyes for about 3 seconds, and my mind fast-forwarded through everything I knew about Charlotte. A poor girl, from the countryside who moved to Yorkshire for a typing job, using her sweet-talking mouth and flirtatious eyes to climb into the director's bed, kicking me out to take the head accountant's chair. What was her true nature? A bottomless pit of greed. An opportunist clinging to money to change her life. Someone like that doesn't fear losing Thomas's love. She fears losing everything, and having to drag her suitcase back to her hometown. She won't flee immediately. I opened my eyes, my tone unnervingly calm. If it were just about running away, she would have dropped everything and left ages ago. The fact she stayed to pack a suitcase means she's fetching her insurance policy. A cunning fox like Charlotte definitely left herself a way out. The original evidence, the bank transfer slips, she must have them in her possession to guard against Thomas turning on her. Arthur nodded, his eyes gleaming with the sharpness of a seasoned solicitor. I understand what you mean. The place she hid them can't be her current flat, as it's too easily searched by Thomas's men. It must be somewhere more discreet. He opened his laptop right on his lap, fingers flying across the keyboard. Earlier, when tracking the 80 grand siphoned from the mill, I saw a portion transferred to a phantom property company. I traced it back. A luxury flat in a new development in Leeds, registered in her mother's name. She must have hidden the evidence there, and right now she's returning to grab it before doing a runner. Send me the postcode, Diana growled, shifting gears and flooring it. The car surged forward, tearing through the thick night fog. On the way, Arthur carefully rang the local economic crime unit, providing the Bradings' address and requesting support to apprehend a suspect attempting to disperse assets related to an embezzlement case. The net was cast, we just had to wait for the prey to throw herself in. The luxury apartment block was silent in the dead of night, completely different from the grimy council estate or the dusty timber mill. The lobby was lined with H-proofly polished granite and deserted, with only instrumental music playing softly from the ceiling speakers. We took the lift straight to the 17th floor. The red-carpeted corridor was deadly quiet. Standing in front of flat 1704, we could already hear the chaotic sounds coming. From inside, the loud slamming of drawers, things crashing onto the wooden floor, and the frantic, heavy footsteps of someone in a panic. The woman was running around like a moth about to dive into a flame. Diana rolled up her sleeves, raising her leg to kick the door down, but I put a hand out to stop her, shaking my head slightly. I stepped forward and pressed the doorbell. Ding-dong. The bell echoed through the silent night. About 5 seconds later, a shrill, trembling, and highly stressed female voice called out through the thick wooden door. Who? Who is out there? I stood up straight, my eyes boring into the peephole, my voice steady and level. It's Eleanor. Just one name, but I was certain Charlotte's legs had turned to jelly inside. There was no reply, only muffled, ragged breathing. A moment later, Charlotte strained her neck, trying to sound tough. What are you doing here? I don't know. What you're talking about? You're not welcome here. Piss off before I call security. Hearing those laughable words, Diana couldn't help but sneer. I didn't smile, nor did I get angry. When dealing with someone standing on the edge of a cliff, absolute calmness is the most terrifying weapon. I stood half a step from the door, slowly enunciating every word. Charlotte, you have 2 choices. 1, you keep hiding in there, hugging your pile of rubbish documents, and set them on fire with a lighter. Then, in 15 minutes, the police will arrive, bash the door in, and drag you out in handcuffs for destroying evidence and dispersing criminal assets. I paused a beat to let the reality sink into her eardrums. 2, you open the door and we talk like reasonable women. Inside, it was still dead quiet. I knew Charlotte was a paranoid, calculating person. She dared to frame me and embezzle from Thomas. But her fatal flaw was her cowardice when faced with the reality of actual prison time. She was terrified of losing her wealthy lifestyle, Seeing she was still being stubborn, I delivered the final psychological blow. You're packing up to run. You must have caught wind of the situation at the mill, right? Vincent has confessed everything. Thomas can't even save his own skin right now. He is frantically looking for someone to blame. Who do you think he'll choose between you and his director's chair? That pile of documents, recordings, and receipts you're hugging in there, do you think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card to blackmail him? You're wrong. Right now, it's a death warrant. If you run with it, Thomas will pin all the blame on you, claiming you were the mastermind who manipulated him. You'll be taking the full brassed 10-year sentence. My words acted like a sledgehammer smashing through Charlotte's final line of defense. A flurry of frantic footsteps ensued. Click! The lock turned, and the heavy wooden door opened a crack, then swung wide. Charlotte stood there. Gone was the crisp office attire, gone was the sharp, haughty makeup of the arrogant lady of the manor at the mill. Her hair was a tangled mess, her face drained of blood, and sweat had smudged her black mascara, leaving dark streaks running down her cheeks. She looked absolutely wretched. Both hands clutched a black waterproof document bag tightly to her chest. Her eyes glared at me, filled with defensiveness, panic, and hatred. What do you actually want? I glanced at the bag she was clutching and replied flatly, It's not about what I want, but do you even have a leg to stand on to negotiate with me? Reflexively, Charlotte stepped back, hiding the bag behind her back. She bit her lip hard, her eyes darting wildly, desperately searching for a fragile glimmer of hope. Eleanor, I never killed anyone or robbed a bank. Back then it wasn't just my idea. Don't push me too far. Push you too far? Diana crossed her arms and laughed bitterly. You colluded to forge documents, siphoned off 80 grand, bribed witnesses, and sent a lawful wife to prison to take the fall for you for 3 long years. You call that not going too far? A woman like you is lucky they don't bring back the gallows. Insulted to her face, Charlotte choked, her face turning red, then pale. She knew. She had no argument. Suddenly, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, her voice dropping into a pathetic plea. Eleanor, if I give you all this evidence, could you be lenient and drop some of the civil charges against me? I'll return all the money. I'll disappear from Yorkshire. Are you delusional? Diana glared, lunging forward to slap her, but I blocked her arm. I stepped onto the threshold, standing face to face with Charlotte, barely an arm's length away. I looked down at her, my face devoid of a single ripple of emotion, as cold and ruthless as an ice statue. No. I gave a crisp, one-word answer, severing all her final illusions. Charlotte's face twisted in terror and despair. Then why should I give it to you? Because if you don't, I tilted my head slightly, leaning in close to her ear, my voice carrying a freezing chill. You will be the sole mastermind. Hand it over, and at least you can prove you were just a pawn in Thomas's hands. Prove that he was the one pulling the strings. Charlotte, I've shown you a way to survive. Whether you choose to do 10 years alone, or drag that bastard down into the mud with you, is up to you. The air in the hallway thickened, suffocatingly silent. Charlotte bit her lips so hard it bled. Her eyes wrestled between unresigned hatred and utter terror. She had once thought herself clever, using dirty tricks to chase me away and seize the assets and the man. But tonight she finally realized she was just a fish on blank H's. The chopping board, thrashing in a net she had woven herself. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to pull in the final catch. Right at that moment, a ding sounded and the lift doors opened. 4 uniformed police officers and detectives from the Economic Crime Unit stepped out, their stern gazes sweeping straight towards flat 1704. Seeing those uniforms, Charlotte's shoulders completely collapsed. Her last shred of hope was broken. Her legs turned to jelly, and she slid down to sit, heavily on the doorstep. She gasped for air, tears, and snot smearing her face. She looked down at the document bag in her hands, crumpled it, and then, with a document bag, gesture of complete reluctance and despair, tossed it towards Arthur's feet. In here, her voice was hoarse and broken, struggling with every word. There's a USB. I secretly recorded Thomas telling me to alter the books to frame you. There are bank statements of the 80 grand going to my mum's account. And WhatsApp messages. He promised that after sorting you out, he'd give me shares in the mill and buy me this flat. Arthur picked up the bag, unzipped it, and quickly scanned the papers and devices inside. His eyes flashed with a cold light behind his glasses. He nodded at me. It's enough. The evidence of motive, profit, and directed conspiracy is complete. 2 police officers stepped forward, reading her rights and making an emergency. Arrest on suspicion of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The click of the metal, handcuffs locking around Charlotte's wrists, echoed sharply. It was a sound I had. They heard 3 years ago when officers in similar uniforms escorted me out of the timber mill under Thomas's fake gaze and Charlotte's triumphant smirk. The wheel of karma had spun full circle. Charlotte was hauled to her feet by the 2 officers, her body limp and pathetic. As she walked past me, she suddenly snapped her head up. In those swollen, mascara-stained eyes, there was no more fake weakness, only absolute, venomous hatred. You won, Charlotte hissed, her voice raspy and bitter. Eleanor, seeing me, this pathetic, are you satisfied? I stood perfectly still, my hands in my pockets, calmly accepting her glare. There was no explosive joy, nor any hypocritical pity. I merely replied coldly, I didn't win. You planted the seeds of malice, so today you reap the bitter harvest. You brought all of this entirely upon yourself. With that, I turned and walked towards the lift, not bothering to linger and look at her for another second. Behind me, Charlotte's hysterical sobbing mingled with the officer's stern demands for her to keep quiet. Walking beside me, Diana let out a long sigh of relief, muttering, serves the bitch right. That'll teach her to steal husbands and ruin lives. Charlotte had fallen. The ironclad evidence was secure in our hands, sealing off every avenue of denial. Now, only one person remained to settle this. 7-year debt of my youth. Thomas, tomorrow morning, it will be your turn. The next morning, Arthur, carrying his familiar scuffed briefcase, walked straight through the gates of the Yorkshire Police Economic Crime Unit. At 8:30 a.m., an emergency board meeting was convened in the first-floor boardroom of the timber mill. There were no suited executives with silk ties like on TV. Around the long mahogany table sat only the sun-weathered, stout faces of the Tubal O's, uncles and elders of Thomas's extended family. These were the men who, years ago, pooled their money to buy the saws and import the timber, patting Thomas on the back and calling him the pride of the family. Today, every single face was thunderous with fury. Standing frozen at the head of the table, Thomas looked like a soulless ghost. The dark circles under his eyes were pitch black, his stubble unkempt. His wrinkled shirt was the same one from last night. He had stayed up all night, trying to contact his old fixers and connections, but the moment they heard the words Economic Crime Unit, they all hung up on him. How do you explain Charlotte getting nicked? The eldest uncle, holding a 20% stake in the mill, slammed his hand on the table, rattling the teacups. 80 grand. You let your bid on the side siphon money out of the Tia and Company, then used the mill's money to bribe witnesses to frame Eleanor. Do you? I think you're God? The police have already sent a notice to freeze the mill's blank accounts. Thomas clenched his teeth, desperately trying to salvage whatever authority he had left. Uncle, calm down and listen to me. I was genuinely deceived by Charlotte. I have a solicitor working on separating my personal assets from the mill. The mill will be fine. Fine my arse, another uncle pointed right in his face, shouting. The business, license, the import permits for the dodgy timber, they're all in your name. How the hell can you separate them? Since this morning, clients have been ringing, non-stop canceling orders. The lads on the factory floor are striking for their wages. This whole empire is about to collapse. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Swearing and insults were hurled directly at Lisend, the man who was once the pride of the family. That's how the world works. When business is booming, everyone shares the profits with sweet words. When disaster strikes, blood ties aren't worth a 20-pound note. The true nature of this patriarchal family model finally revealed itself as nothing but selfishness and callousness. The eldest uncle cleared his throat, delivering the final, brutal verdict. To save this mill from being completely seized, from this moment on, the board of Investors suspends you from all executive duties. Hand over the company seal and the safe keys. You can sort out your own mess yourself. Don't think you can drag the whole family down with you. It was a bucket of ice water to Thomas's face. He stared wide-eyed at his own, flesh and blood around the table. They were discarding him, exactly how he had discarded me 3 years ago. Karma arrived so swiftly and brutally he didn't even have time to react. Thomas's throat was tight and bitter. His lips moved, but he couldn't force out a curse in return. He reached into his pocket, tossed the bunch of mill keys onto the table with a clatter, turned on his heel, and stumbled out the door. The first-floor corridor was empty. Thomas gripped the iron railing, dragging his heavy feet down the stairs. Down on the factory floor, the normally deafening screech of circular saws and planers was completely silent. Dozens of loaders and carpenters stood in small groups past the mountains of sawdust, murmuring quietly. Seeing Thomas come down, every eye locked onto him. There was no more fearful, sycophantic mourning, boss like usual. Instead, there was pointing, whispering, and looks of pure disgust. A respectable man who thumped his chest, claiming to be a model husband, turned out to be a scumbag who played away from home and sent his wife to prison just to crown his mistress. That scandalous news had turned Thomas into a laughingstock among all the mill workers. The pungent smell of sawdust and wood glue, which used to make him proud of his wealth, now felt like acid burning his lungs. Thomas kept his head down, taking uneven steps towards the main gates of the Proso mill. He just wanted to escape this place, to escape those eyes stripping him bare. But it seemed God had timed it perfectly to the minute. Just as the toe of Thomas's shoe stepped past the rusted iron gates, the piercing wail of police, sirens echoed from a distance, tearing through the bleak winter morning air. Not one, but 2 marked police cars drove in tandem, braking sharply right in front of him, blocking his path. The flashing blue lights reflected off Thomas's ashen face. 4 uniformed officers stepped out. The one leading marched straight towards Thomas, holding a document stamped with a red seal. As the sirens died down, the commotion among the workers behind him erupted. Neighbors living nearby ran out to watch the spectacle. A few idle youths even pulled out their phones to record it. Thomas stood frozen. His feet felt nailed to the ground. He couldn't move, forward or back. The arrogant shell of a powerful mill director was utterly shattered in the light of day. Thomas Luke, the officer's voice was authoritative and loud enough for everyone. Around to hear. We have a warrant for your arrest to assist in the investigation of conspiracy to falsify official documents, fraud and perverting the course of justice. We require your cooperation. Every word struck his chest like a hammer. Thomas gasped for air, his eyes bulging as he shook his head in panic. No, I didn't do it. You've got the wrong man. But his feeble denials fell on deaf ears. Another officer stepped up and pulled Thomas's arms behind his back. A cold click sounded as the shiny metal handcuffs locked firmly around his wrists, biting into his skin. Right at the exact moment that metallic click echoed, I sat in the passenger seat of the Mini Cooper parked not far away, quietly rolling down the window. Diana sat next to me, smacking the steering wheel gleefully. Die, you bastard. Serves you right. Now you know what it feels like to be handcuffed in front of Lesh. Everyone, see how humiliating it is. I didn't smile. My gaze pierced through the thin fog, looking straight at the mill gates. 3 years ago, in this exact spot, I was escorted away amidst the whispers of the crowd. Meanwhile, Thomas stood high on the steps, his arm around Charlotte, playing the helpless husband, watching his wife go down the wrong path. The stifling resentment of that day had weighed on my mind like a ghost. For 1,000 sleepless nights. Today, the roles were reversed. Thomas was being manhandled towards the police van. Amidst the jeers and shouts of the crowd, he suddenly stopped. As if guided by some invisible thread, he lifted his head, his gaze sweeping over dozens of bobbing heads before locking straight onto the car parked across the road. He saw me amidst the chaos. Our eyes met for a few seconds. I sat there, as calm and still as a winter lake. My face showed no joy, no anger, and certainly not a fraction of pity. There was only the utter coldness of someone watching a stranger suffer the consequences of his own actions. In Thomas's eyes at that moment, there were no more excuses, no more resistance. Seeing my absolute indifference, the last shred of pride in him seemed to collapse. He realized that between us there was no chance of redemption whatsoever. He had truly lost everything: his family, his wife and child, his wealth, and the vain reputation he had spent his life maintaining. Thomas blinked, his bloodshot eyes filling with tears. He didn't scream apologies, nor did he frantically call my name. He simply lowered his head, pulling back his usual swagger, hunching his shoulders to let the officers force him into the back seat of the police van. The door slammed shut, and the sirens wailed once more, piercing the thin fog as they carried Thomas away from his rotting timber kingdom. I slowly pressed the button to roll up the window, shutting out the noisy street. "Let's go, Diana," I said softly, breaking the silence in the car. "Let's go. Home. This afternoon, I want to go pick up Daisy." Diana turned to look at me, her eyes filled with an indescribable relief and joy. "Yeah, let's go home. Today we have to go to the market and buy a whole roast chicken to celebrate. Tonight, you and your daughter can finally get a proper good night's sleep. The nightmare is over." The next morning, I woke up very early. The first thing I saw was the crisp, white ceiling, the morning sun filtering through the pale yellow curtains, casting a long, warm streak on the wooden floor. Beside me, little Daisy was fast asleep, her breathing steady, her tiny mouth occasionally pouting as if she were sucking on a sweet in her dreams. I lay on my side, reaching out to carefully brush a few stray hairs off her forehead, terrified of waking her. My hands, normally calloused from hard labor, suddenly felt incredibly timid when touching her soft skin. 3 years. Thousands of sleepless nights, gritting my teeth and swallowing my tears, all in 20 idas, just waiting for this simple, peaceful moment. My heart, which had frozen into a sharp block of iron to deal with my enemies, suddenly melted completely. "You awake? Go wash your face and come out for breakfast. I got some cracking bacon buddies from the cafe down the road," Diana's voice, along with the clatter of plates, pulled me back to reality. I gently got out of bed, threw on a thin cardigan, and walked out. Breakfast was simple and cozy. Diana slurped her tea whilst eagerly recounting how the Lurk family mill had been in absolute chaos since last night. The news of Director Thomas being handcuffed right at his gates had made the front page of the local online papers. I listened, quietly handing her an extra napkin, making no comment. The initial satisfaction had passed. Now, there was only the quiet anticipation of someone waiting for the final judgment of the law. After breakfast, I asked Diana to stay and look after Daisy while I took a cab down to Arthur's office to sign some civil lawsuit authorization papers. However, life never lets you find peace that easily. Just as I stepped out of the lift and headed towards the busy apartment lobby, a familiar figure charged at me like a tornado. "Eleanor, you vindictive bitch, stop right there." A shrill, sharp, and bitter shriek tore through the quiet morning air. A few pedestrians jumped and scattered to the sides. I stopped. Barely 3 steps away was Mrs. Margaret, Thomas's biological mother. She was wearing a posh silk blouse, a string of sandalwood prayer beads dangling from her wrist, the typical attire of rich old women who frequent the Fader temple on Sundays to show off their compassion. But right now, there was absolutely nothing compassionate about her face. It was twisted, veins bulging. On her forehead, her eyes bloodshot, glaring at me as if she wanted to eat me alive. Before I could even open my mouth, Mrs. Margaret lunged forward, pointing a finger adorned with a massive gold ring right in my face, screaming, "You think? You're so clever, don't you? You think you've grown wings? Whatever Thomas did. Wrong. He is still your husband. He's the man who dragged you out of poverty to make you the lady of the house. Husband and wife should sort things out behind closed doors. You're so heartless you'd side with outsiders to throw him in prison and freeze the family mill? Are you trying to destroy this entire family?" The elderly concierge saw the commotion and hurried over to intervene, but Mrs. Margaret shoved him aside, continuing her theatrical wailing. "Look at this. Everyone, look at this vicious, wicked daughter-in-law. She framed her husband and sent him to prison, dragging our family's name through the mud. You, ungrateful jinx." The neighbors in the lobby stopped and started whispering, pointing at us. Everyone was curious about this loud, dramatic scene. I stood rooted to the spot, my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets, looking at that old face wrinkled with anger and pride. Images from 3 years ago flashed through my mind. On the day of my sentencing, this very woman in her silk blouse stood outside the courthouse, spat on the ground at my feet, and coldly told Thomas to file for divorce quickly so he could bring the sweet, obedient Charlotte home to bear him a son. The cruelty of that family, from top to bottom, was cut from the exact same cloth. I waited until she had screamed herself hoarse and was gasping for breath before taking a slow step forward. There was no flinching, no tears of grievance. I stood tall, my eyes calm but chilling to the bone, piercing straight into Mrs. Margaret's shifty eyes. "Are you finished?" My voice was even, not raised, but the weight behind every word was enough to silence the crowd. Mrs. Margaret froze. Perhaps she didn't expect me to react with such indifference. Usually, if she raised her voice, I would bow my head and endure it. But that weak Eleanor died in a prison cell a long time ago. "You call me heartless. You say I framed him." I smirked, a hollow smile, crossing my lips. "Mrs. Margaret, the Economic Crime Unit doesn't have the free time to listen to a newly released ex-con like me and just go arrest people. Your son was handcuffed and dragged away because he and his mistress embezzled, forged documents, bribed witnesses, and committed perjury. The evidence is plain as day. You go to the temple and chant every day. Didn't Buddha teach you about karma? You dare speak to me like that?" Mrs. Margaret shook with rage, raising her hand to slap me, but I decisively swatted her withered arm away. The strength of a woman who had done hard labor in a prison sewing factory was not something an old woman accustomed to luxury could match. Mrs. Margaret stumbled back, clutching her arm, looking utterly stunned. I took another step, pressing closer to her, my voice as sharp as a razor. "Don't ever use the title of mother-in-law to lecture me again. 3 years ago, when your son colluded with his mistress to send me to court, where were you? You stood right there, clapping and cheering, ordering people to throw my clothes into the alley like rubbish. You said a convicted, embezzling daughter-in-law dirtied your family's ancestral altar. You kicked me out so you could clear the way for Charlotte. Did you care about family ties back then?" The crowd's mood began to shift. The whispers turned from curiosity to indignation on my behalf. A few aunties returning from the shops glared at Mrs. 12. Margaret, scoffing. Mrs. Margaret's face turned from red to stark white. Her eyes darted around, desperately looking for a lifeline to save her last shred of dignity. Well, I didn't know back then. But now, you gave birth to Daisy. Thomas is her biological father. You're destroying him. Do you want your daughter to grow up being mocked for having a dad in prison? The child is innocent." Hearing this, my chest heaved. A fire of fierce resentment flared up, but I suppressed it tightly in my throat. "Don't you dare mention my daughter with that hypocritical mouth of yours." I gritted out every word, my cold eyes making her shudder. "When I was pregnant in a dark prison, crying into my food, sick without a single pill, nearly bleeding, to death on the infirmary delivery table, where were you and your son? Ah, you were busy throwing a baby shower for Charlotte's fake pregnancy, weren't you? Now the mill is collapsing, and your son is facing court. Suddenly you remember you have a granddaughter to use as a human shield? Let me tell you, my daughter would rather have no father at all than a scumbag for a dad and a cold-blooded family like yours." My words smashed into Mrs. Margaret's head like boulders. Every excuse, every pathetic justification she had was stripped bare in broad daylight. The crowd was buzzing. Someone even openly criticized her as a wicked old woman. Mrs. Margaret was speechless, her chest heaving as she clutched it, looking like she was about to have a heart attack. She was used to bullying the weak, but faced with solid stone, the humiliation and embarrassment meant she had no face left to stand there. "Remember this." I dropped one final, ice-cold sentence. "Never show your face in front of me and my daughter ever again." With that, I turned my back, strode straight out of the apartment gates, and hailed an approaching black cab, leaving behind the fake dramatic wailing of my treacherous former mother-in-law. My heart felt incredibly at peace. The final knot of resentment, suppressed for 3 long years, had finally been purged. Today, at 9:30 a.m., I arrived at Arthur's law office. Contrary to its usual quiet atmosphere, Today, the office was filled with camera flashes and chatter. Arthur had proactively organized a small press conference with reporters from local papers and the regional news. The case of a prominent Yorkshire mill director being arrested for framing his own wife was prime bait for the press. With his sharp instincts, Arthur knew this was the best opportunity to use public pressure to block any avenues Thomas had for bribing his way out. I walked in and took the armchair in the center of the room next to Arthur. Wore no makeup, nor did I dress in designer clothes to play the pitiful victim. I simply wore a plain white blouse, my hair tied back neatly. The calm, steadfast demeanor radiated from a woman who had shattered her own chains. The reporters pointed their microphones and dictaphones at me. Rapid fire. Questions ensued. Eleanor, there are rumors that Thomas's family is offering a massive a settlement for you to drop the civil charges and ask for leniency for him. Are you considering a settlement for the sake of your child's future? A young male? Reporter asked. In a cold holding cell a few miles away, through the phone screen of his family-hired solicitor, Thomas was glued to my every move on the live broadcast. Arthur had subtly tipped me off about this. Thomas was waiting, perhaps deep. Down in his chauvinistic ego, he still held a sliver of hope that, for money, or out of old sentiment, I would show mercy and leave him a way out. I looked straight into the camera lens, calmly but firmly enunciating every word. There will be no concessions or settlements whatsoever. The entire room fell dead silent. Only the clicking of camera shutters could be heard, I continued, my voice decisive, carrying the weight of 1,000 days of suffering. 3 years ago, when Thomas used his money and power to twist the looted truth and throw me into prison, he never mentioned the word settlement. 3 years later, when my daughter was born in the shadows of a prison cell and grew up deprived of love, he never mentioned the word future. The law is not something you can buy, nor is it a joke for the wicked to use as a tool to crush others and then whitewash with cash. I trust the authorities will be strict and just. Everyone involved in that conspiracy mastermind or accomplice must pay the appropriate price under the law. Somewhere in a police station, the phone in Thomas's solicitor's hand slipped and fell onto the desk. Tears of absolute regret, of total, inescapable despair, finally burst forth. He understood. That ironclad statement of mine had extinguished his illusions entirely. His Eleanor, the wife who had endured hardships for him, had been killed by his own hands. The woman on the screen was now a stranger who had come to collect a blood debt. The press conference ended swiftly. I declined to answer further questions. Probing into my private life, bowed politely, and walked out of the office. On the day of the preliminary hearing, the sun broke through after a long stretch of freezing Yorkshire weather. In the dock, those who had once stood high and trampled over me now sat with their heads bowed, wearing gray prison tracksuits. Charlotte looked so haggard she was unrecognizable. Without her makeup, her cheekbones jutted out, her eyes sunken with dark bags. Beside her was Thomas. The once arrogant straight back of the mill director was now hunched, pathetic, and drained of all life. He just sat there, staring blankly at the tiled floor, seemingly having given up completely. Based on the evidence, investigation documents, and the testimonies of the Paradius defendants, the court sentences the defendant Charlotte to 10 years in prison. For embezzlement and forgery of official documents, the defendant Thomas is sentenced to 3 years in prison for concealing criminal property and perverting the course of justice. The defendant Vincent. The judge's wooden gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack. Simultaneously, the court officially overturned the verdict handed down 3 years ago against Eleanor, restoring all legal rights and her reputation, effective immediately. 3 years, over 1,000 days branded as a corrupt female convict, spat on by society, abandoned by my in-laws. That filthy label was finally ripped off completely. I gently tightened my arms around little Daisy, burying my face in her tiny shoulder, letting a single tear roll down. Not a tear of weakness, but of ultimate liberation. As the court security officers stepped forward to escort the defendants out of the dock, Thomas's footsteps suddenly slowed. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the public gallery before stopping exactly on me and my daughter. It was a look filled with profound, shattered, and desperate remorse. He saw me, in a neat silk blouse, my face calm and radiant. He saw the daughter carrying, his flesh and blood wrapping her tiny arms tightly around her mother's neck. Daisy, seeing a stranger staring at her, timidly said in her soft voice, "Mummy. Eleanor, let's go home." Just that one phrase, "Mummy Eleanor," echoing in the large courtroom, made Thomas stagger. He opened his mouth as if to call my name, but his throat was so choked he couldn't make a sound. He realized that the most precious thing in a man's life wasn't the director's chair, nor the dirty money from the mill, but the small family right in front of him. Unfortunately, his hands would never be able to touch them again. Half a year passed. After my reputation was restored and I received compensation for the wrongful conviction, I used that capital, along with some savings Diana lent me, to return to my old trade. Before marrying Thomas, I was a well-known local seamstress. The long days in prison working in the sewing workshop actually kept my hands sharp. "Eleanor, have a look at this hem for me. Is the cut smooth enough?" Jane, an assistant I hired last month, stepped out of the cutting room asking nervously. I put down my fabric scissors, walked over, and ran my hand along the cut line. "Take the waist in another centimeter. This client is a bit fuller, a deeper curve will hide the tummy nicely when she wears it." Just as I finished speaking, Diana walked through the door carrying a massive bag of gala apples, her familiar ringing laugh preceding her. "The boutique owner is busy today, eh? I closed the cafe early to pop over and see how you're doing." I smiled, pointing to the tea set on the small table in the corner. "Put the kettle on yourself. I'll just finish this hem for the client." Diana bit into a crisp apple with a crunch. "Thomas's timber mill got repossessed last month. The bank sealed it right up. His mum, Margaret, had to move back to a tiny council bungalow out in the sticks. Heard she just sits by the door all day shouting abuse, gone completely mental. Proper karma, that is." As for Thomas, apparently he behaved himself inside but developed severe stomach ulcers. Last week, he was granted medical parole to await the rest of his sentence under house arrest. My hand, guiding the sewing machine, paused for a split second, but then smoothly continued. "I don't care about that family anymore. You reap what you sow. My mind is entirely focused on this boutique and Daisy now." Diana looked at me, her eyes shining with relief. She knew I had truly stepped out of the darkness. Just past 4 p.m., I told my assistant to lock up and I grabbed my bag to leave. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting a golden glow over the familiar Yorkshire streets. Daisy's nursery was just 2 streets away from the Bautis boutique. As soon as she saw her mother at the iron gates, she giggled, carrying her little frog backpack, and trotted out. "Mummy Eleanor." I opened my arms to catch my little angel, lifting her up and planting a big kiss on her dimpled cheek. "Was Daisy a good girl at nursery today? Did you finish all your lunch?" "Daisy was very good. The teacher even gave me a gold star." She held out her tiny hand to show off the red sticker. "Brilliant. Then Mummy will treat you to a Chelsea bun before we go home." Hand in hand, mother and daughter chattered as we walked down the pavement. The sweet smell of warm pastry and icing drifted up from a bakery on the corner. I bought 2, handed one to her, and watched her take tiny, joyful bites. The sunset illuminated her chubby cheeks, shining warm, gentle rays straight into my heart. I didn't need a mansion or luxury cars. I didn't need extravagant fake vows. My peace now was simply holding my daughter's hand, walking under the brilliant sun, no longer living in fear, no longer having to bow my head to anyone. In this life, I was finally free to be the master of my own destiny. Dear viewers, the story ends here.